Peter from Mango, and welcome to Compliance Conversations, where we bring experts in to talk about certain things that people have asked. And today we're talking about improvement, and I've got Craig Thornton from Mango and Sean Banayan from Kaizen Consulting. Sean, you help companies with their ISO certification, help companies that are having problems with their certification in order to say, hey, you need some help. So improvement. Why is it so important for an organisation to have a good improvement culture?
I think the best example is Sony Walkman. For those who remember, Sony Walkman had almost 100% of the share market. And next year, when these little iPads came, their share of market dropped to 5%. So there's a general rule that if you don't improve by 20% every year, someone will take you, take your entire company. One of your competitors would take your entire company away one day. So it's a race. There's no such thing as standing still. You're either moving forward or backwards because other competitors are moving forward. So to me, it's, my experience of dealing with lots of companies, I feel like it's quite important to establish where you are and what's considered as improvement versus times that your standard is dropping. So for example, if someone is not turning up to work on time and you tell them, can come to work on time, you're not improving. You're just basically pulling that person to meet the standard. Whereas if people come up with ideas such as improving, reducing the typical team boots, whether it's time wasting or waiting or inventory, over processing, overproduction or defects, that's what you consider as improvement. And if you don't do that, the bottom line is you won't be in business in a long run.
Cool. And that's the way I think it. But I think a lot of times people look as improvement as to bring it up to just the standard. That's what it is. Oh, we've raised all of these things because we had a problem and we want it brought up to the standard.
Yeah.
So Craig, you audited hundreds of companies. So what's your experience? Do they just use improvement just to bring it up to the standard, or do they have it to exceed the standard, to look for innovation and changes that will make the company more profitable or make a process better?
Well, like everything, it depends. But the majority of companies I saw and was a little disappointed in was they would just meet that standard. There were very few companies that actually would try and exceed the standard. And those ones that would use like Kaizen or Kaizen Consulting or using best practice, there were very few. So I think it's a great opportunity for organisations that just want to get above the competition and hit higher targets, that they should actually completely change their focus of their business onto improvement. And it's something that I've been doing recently in some of my blogs and webinars as well, is I'm wanting people to reduce the amount of compliance they do, but spend that extra time that they're saving on doing compliance on improvement. Because, like you say, you're going to get above the competition and you're going to stay in business longer, and there's going to be more profits.
So why don't you think people do it? Is it because traditionally the improvement process was sort of called non-conformance or NCR? It had this negativity around it. Is it in the name or is it in the culture? Why don't people innovate?
I think the name is, it was a good, step from the standard to call it improvement. I've been involved in businesses that non-conformance and corrective action, even the terminology that people use, you raise a non-conformance against engineering, even that against has a notation that you're attacking that department. So I think from that perspective it's quite good that it doesn't have that negative notation, so it's improvement. But coming back to my original point, I think it's quite important to establish that baseline. Are we actually has the standard drop and we're just bringing it back to where it should be, or are we actually improving the system? So for me, if in the manufacturing area, if you have a defective product or if you failed the final inspection, you're not improving anything by correcting that. Yes, we can call that improvements, corrective action, NCR or whatever, but there's nothing, you're basically correcting something that went wrong. If someone else came and say, we can put, Pokiyoki or error-proof this part of the process, so we don't need to, do the final inspection, it would be faster, better quality, and so on, that to me is improvement. So I'm okay with the terminology as long as people have that distinction between whether that is below the standard or you're actually raising the bar.
Okay. So who should raise improvements within an organisation? Because it's like you got a negative name.
Yeah.
People don't understand the point of it. So how can you get people to be involved and feeling that they're empowered to raise an improvement? What techniques are there to do that?
There are two things. One is how to raise it. So I think it needs to be formally recorded. A lot of companies are still up until now. A lot of companies have, we have the culture of people just talking about it. But the problem with that is, in an organization, if you're a manager, if you've got authority and resources, you can pull a team together in a meeting room. Create action lists, allocate those resources. But if someone else in the organization who don't have, access to that much resource, their idea will never get enough attention. So it needs to be formally recorded, digitally recorded, so you don't need to, transfer that to a register and then, record actions, against it. Just like when you send an email, you're not going to create another email in your sent box. It automatically goes to your sent box. But in terms of what is an improvement and who should raise it, I think there needs to be some guideline around it. So the businesses that I've been involved with, we always mention you have to raise an improvement that is about your own area, because otherwise it becomes like an attack. People would attack other people, other function of the business. From sales would say, I know how engineering can improve, and then from engineering there is another improvement. So I know how sales can improve. So it has to be about your own area and your own function, and also you need to raise a solution, not a problem. Improvement sometimes is used as a mean of raising a problem. I know there's a problem and I'm pointing at it. You guys sort it out. The culture needs to change, that you need to come up with a solution. Otherwise it's quite easy to just go around the business and identify all the problems or all the areas that can be improved. But it's coming up with a solution is the real deal.
Yeah. So we got people reporting these things, which is great, and we've put a framework around what they should put and not blaming other people. So where do these improvements go? You put them into a system. So I'm used to, when I was quality manager, is that we had the exec team was the people that they all ended up, so that you did the investigation, you looked at things, but the senior management team were always involved in the sign-off part at the end, because it related to their businesses. But I see that as that it's just another compliance activity and it gets pushed down and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You've worked for some places where you've been on the senior management team. Did you bring those things up, and have you been in places where you haven't been able to bring them up there, and what was the result? Was it better or worse? Or
there's an advantage and disadvantage to both scenarios. I think you need to categorize those improvements. So there are certain improvements that are just, we used to call them just do it. So if someone would say, if I bring my tool close to me, it's easier for me to do my job, that's a just do it. You still want some sort of governance around it. You don't want, people just to do things because they may not consider the impact of that. There might be someone else who uses that tool, the other table, So you want some governance around it, but there are certain improvements that are just do it, Then there are the ones that requires change management. So it's not necessarily something that will cost a lot of money, but it requires change management. So we used to call them team effort. So we will bring them up in a toolbox meeting or a team meeting and ask everyone, what do you think? What would be the impact of that on your area? And then the third one would be management review, which requires money, high impact, big piece of machinery or equipment, or changing the process altogether. And you would do this categorization, however you want to do it, for a couple of reasons. One is, if you bring everything to the management meeting or senior management meeting, then you would just lose their full attention to all the details. It would be hundreds of ideas. Some of them may not require their level of influence in the organization. And also, you would actually take that empowerment from people that they feel like for whatever they want to do, they need to ask for authority, whether you need to empower people within their area, within their own power to just continuously improve. In some businesses, they even call it, 1 second improvement, So every day, just come up with something that would save you a second. Mm-hmm. And you can just multiply that by number of people and number of processes in the organization over the whole year, and you can see the impact of it. So you want that empowerment, but also that change management is quite important. Otherwise, they may do things that they would not consider the impact of it on other people.
That's fantastic, Sean. So, Craig, have you got anything else that you want to add?
The thing that companies struggle with when they're maybe certified is, like Sean says, they get a big bucket of non-conformances and they've got a big bucket of improvements, and they try and work out which one to do first, and they never actually get round to doing any. So I would visit 1 year, and then a year later I'd still see the same things listed there, and there'd be no prioritisation of those improvements. So companies need to sort of think about how to prioritise these things. The separating them into those 3 areas is absolutely perfect. I think they're great suggestions there. So prioritising and putting those improvements through some sort of prioritisation process. The big ones go through management team, the small ones can go through the individuals or the teams. I think great idea. So,
I also think, just if I could add one last thing, compliance. People in organizations should change their focus from just complying. Let's take an internal audit as an example. So you could have an internal audit from the compliance point of view. Yes, you meet the requirement of clause 9.2, and yes, you have allocated resources, and if there was a non-conformance, you have raised it. Ticking the boxes is not necessarily that difficult. The main thing is, are we actually gaining anything from doing this audit? So majority of companies, I would, it's not scientific number, but I think, around 60-70% of companies just do it just to tick the box.
Mm-hmm.
The real gain is when you say, what is important in this organization that we want to check? So let's call that internal audit. What do we want to check? What can go wrong? So those questions in our internal audit should be that, because they are the things that we care about. They are the things that could cost us a lot of money or put us under risk. Therefore, that's what we want to call an internal audit. So, the shift of focus from ticking a box because I'm required to say, do we have documents? Yes. Are they version controlled? Yes. From that, in both of them you have internal audits and both of them you comply. But one is you have turned that cost, because one is you're putting your money, spending money to comply, whereas the other one is saving you money. So that's the change.
and that's sort of from my viewpoint. For a start, don't do this tick and flick compliance rubbish. Get into the real meaty stuff of making improvements that can really make a difference to the bottom line. So, total agreement there.
Yeah.
That's great, guys. So really what I'm hearing is get as many people involved, but have a structure by which you prioritise these, and have in each of those different categories have a known process, and that way employees will see the process, they'll believe in the process, and they'll continue to add these. And I think when companies have a good culture, the improvements get better as they actually see something, they get buy-in. So thanks a lot, Sean, Craig.